My beloved child, wait, before your mind tries to understand this too quickly, just stay here for a moment, because something has already begun shifting, and you can feel it, can't you? Not loudly, not dramatically, but in that quiet, almost unnoticeable way, like a truth gently knocking from within. There is something you've sensed for a long time, something that never fully left your awareness, even when you tried to move forward, even when you told yourself it was over. And yet, it lingered, not as pain, but as a question. Why did it feel unfinished? Why did it feel like something was left unsaid, like a chapter that was never truly closed? Pause here, feel that. Because what you are about to understand isn't sudden, it has been building, silently, behind moments you didn't even notice. They didn't leave the way you think they did. No, that's not the full story. There was a hesitation inside them, a quiet resistance, something that kept pulling them back toward you, even when everything around them was pushing them away. And that inner pull, it never faded. It only grew quieter, deeper, more difficult to ignore. And here is where everything begins to shift. Because what they are feeling now is not confusion anymore. It is clarity. But clarity doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives like this, soft, undeniable, and impossible to escape. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt someone's presence, even when they were not physically there? Not just memories, not just thoughts, but something deeper, like a connection that refuses to break? That's not coincidence. That is what has been happening on their side too. And they truly tried to silence it. They distracted themselves. They convinced themselves that time would change things. That distance would make it easier. But instead, something unexpected happened. The more they tried to move away, the more they started seeing you, not just in memories, but in realizations. Little things began to remind them, not in a painful way, but in a meaningful way. A sentence they heard. A moment they experienced. A quiet realization late at night. And suddenly, it wasn't about missing you anymore. It became about understanding you. And that is a completely different kind of awareness. Don't skip this part, because this is where the truth begins to unfold. They started to see what they couldn't see before. Not because you changed, but because they did. Growth has a strange way of revealing what once felt invisible. And now, they are facing something they can no longer ignore. A truth that has been waiting patiently. They always wanted to stay. Yes, even in the moments when it seemed like they chose otherwise. Even when their actions didn't reflect it. Even when silence made it feel like they had moved on. There was a part of them that never agreed with leaving, but something held them back. Not because of you, and not because the connection wasn't real. It was something internal, something they didn't yet understand at the time. A fear, not loud, not obvious, but present. A fear of fully stepping into something that felt too deep, too meaningful, too real. Because real connections don't just bring comfort. They also bring reflection. And sometimes, reflection can feel overwhelming when someone isn't ready to face themselves. So they stepped back, not to lose you, but because they didn't yet know how to hold something that mattered this much. Take a breath here. Because this part is important. They are no longer in that same place. Something inside them has shifted. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily, quietly, until one day, they realized something that changed everything. They realized it was never about finding something better. It was about understanding what they already had. And once that realization settles in, it doesn't leave. It stays. It grows. It becomes impossible to ignore. And now, they are standing at a moment they cannot avoid anymore. A moment where silence is no longer enough. A moment where the truth must be spoken. But here is the part that might surprise you. They are not rushing, because this isn't impulsive. This is something they have been preparing themselves for, without even realizing it. Every thought, every realization, every quiet moment of reflection has been leading them here, to this exact point, where they finally feel ready. Not just to speak, but to be honest, completely honest. And that kind of honesty doesn't come from pressure. It comes from understanding. Stay with this feeling. Because what's about to unfold next is not just about what they will say. It's about why they couldn't say it before. And once you understand that, everything you thought you knew will begin to look different, just a little longer. Because something important is waiting for you in what comes next. Something inside them refused to stay silent any longer, not in a loud, chaotic way, but in that quiet persistence that keeps returning, no matter how many times it's pushed away. And if you slow down for a second, you can almost feel the weight of that moment they're standing in right now. Because this isn't just about saying words. This is about finally facing something they once avoided. Have you ever noticed how the truth doesn't disappear, it just waits? It waits in the background, in the pauses between distractions, in the stillness when everything else fades away. That's where they've been meeting it. Again, and again, and again. At first, they tried to brush it aside. They told themselves it didn't matter anymore. They convinced themselves that what they felt back then was just a phase, just a moment, just something that would eventually fade. But it didn't. Instead, it evolved. It deepened. It became something they could no longer explain away. And this is where their internal world began to change in ways they didn't expect. Because the more they tried to move forward, the more they started to feel like something wasn't aligning. Things that once seemed right started to feel incomplete. Conversations with others felt surface level. Moments that should have brought comfort felt strangely empty. And they couldn't understand why, until one quiet realization found them. Not all connections are meant to be replaced. Pause there. Let that settle. Because that realization, it doesn't come easily. It arrives only after someone has tried everything else. And once it arrives, it changes everything. Don't skip this, because this is where their truth becomes undeniable. They began to look back, not with regret, but with clarity. And for the first time, they weren't focusing on what went wrong. They were seeing what was real. They remembered the way you understood them, without needing explanations. They remembered how your presence felt, not forced, not complicated, just natural. They remembered the quiet comfort, the kind that doesn't demand attention, but stays with you long after. And suddenly, it wasn't just memories anymore. It was awareness. A deep, undeniable awareness that what they experienced with you was not ordinary. And that's when the truth started to become impossible to ignore. They always wanted to stay, not because they didn't have options, but because what they felt with you wasn't something they could recreate elsewhere. But here is the part they struggled to accept. If it was so real, then why did they leave? And this question stayed with them, longer than anything else. Because the answer wasn't simple. It wasn't something they could explain in one moment, or even understand immediately. It required them to look within. And that is where everything began to unfold. You see, sometimes people don't walk away because they want to. Sometimes they walk away because they don't yet feel ready to receive something real. And that's what this was. Something real. Something that didn't just exist on the surface, but reached deeper, into parts of them they weren't used to facing. And instead of embracing that depth, they stepped back from it. Not consciously, not intentionally, but instinctively. Because depth can feel unfamiliar when someone has spent their life in shallower waters. And now, they see that, clearly, without confusion, without denial. And that clarity, it didn't arrive all at once. It came in moments, small moments that didn't seem important at first, but slowly began to connect. A conversation that reminded them of you. A silence that felt different without you. A realization that came when they least expected it. And piece by piece, the truth started forming. They didn't lose you. They stepped away from something they didn't yet understand. And that distinction, it changes everything. Take a breath here. Because this next part matters more than you think. They are no longer running from that understanding. They are stepping toward it. And stepping toward truth requires courage. Because it means accepting something they once avoided. It means admitting, not to you first, but to themselves, that what they felt never truly left. Stay till the end, because something important is waiting for you in this realization. They are beginning to see you differently now, not as someone from their past, but as someone who was always meant to stay connected to their path. And when that shift happens, it's no longer about timing, it becomes about truth. And truth has a way of finding its moment, even if it takes longer than expected. Even if it arrives after distance, after silence, after confusion. It still arrives. And right now, they are standing in that moment. A moment where everything feels clear. But also unspoken. Because understanding something internally and expressing it externally are two very different steps. And this is where they are now, between knowing and saying, between feeling and expressing. And that space, it's not empty, it's filled with everything they are preparing to tell you, but they are not rushing it, because for the first time, they don't want to say something halfway, they don't want to repeat old patterns, or speak from uncertainty. They want to be real, completely real, and that takes time. But here is what you need to understand. They are not hesitating because they don't care. They are pausing because they finally do. Let that sink in, because it changes the entire meaning of their silence. It's no longer distance. It's preparation. Preparation for something that carries weight. Something that cannot be taken lightly. Something that has been waiting longer than both of you realize. And now, that moment is getting closer. Closer than it has ever been before. You might not see it yet. You might not hear it yet. But it is forming, quietly, steadily, and when it finally reaches you, it won't feel forced. It will feel understood. Because this truth, it's not just about what they want to say, it's about what they have finally realized. And once someone reaches that level of realization, they are no longer trying to forget you. They are trying to understand why they never could. And that question, it leads them back to the same answer every time. You mattered, more than they admitted, more than they expressed. More than they even allowed themselves to fully feel at the time. And now, they are seeing it clearly, without resistance, without denial, without distraction. And clarity like this doesn't fade. It stays. It deepens. It becomes the foundation for what comes next. But here's where it becomes even more real. They are starting to imagine the moment they finally speak to you again. Not in a dramatic way, not in a rehearsed way, but in a real, honest, grounded way. And that thought, it doesn't feel distant anymore. It feels possible, closer than it has ever been. But with that closeness comes something else, a quiet nervousness, not fear of you, but fear of the truth they now carry, because once they say it, everything changes. There is no going back to silence, no returning to distance, no pretending it didn't matter, and that realization, it makes them pause, not to stop, but to make sure they do it right, because this time, they don't want to lose the moment. They don't want to leave anything unsaid. They don't want to walk away from something real again. And that intention, it's new, it's different, it's something they didn't have before. Take a breath here. Because what you're witnessing is not just a realization, it's a transformation, from uncertainty to clarity, from distance to intention, from silence to truth. And transformations like this, they don't happen without meaning. They happen because something deeper is guiding the process, something that neither of you fully understood before. But now, it's becoming clearer, piece by piece, moment by moment. And you are part of that clarity, not by chance, not by coincidence, but because the connection you shared, it carried something real from the beginning, something that didn't fade with time, something that waited until both of you could understand it properly. And now, that understanding is aligning, on both sides, even if it doesn't feel obvious yet, even if it hasn't been spoken yet. It is happening, quietly, powerfully, undeniably. Don't skip this moment. Because this is where everything begins to prepare for what comes next. They are no longer asking themselves if they should reach out. They are asking themselves how to say what they couldn't say before. How to explain what they didn't understand before. How to express something that has grown deeper over time. And that question, it's bringing them closer to action. Closer to expression, closer to you. But here's the part that most people don't realize. The moment before someone speaks their truth is often the most silent, not because nothing is happening, but because everything is aligning. And that is exactly where they are, right before the moment, right before the words, right before the truth finally steps into the light. So stay with this just a little longer. Because what they are about to say will not only reveal how they feel now, it will reveal what they felt all along, but didn't know how to hold. And once that is spoken, nothing between you will feel the same again.